Blum, inviting you to stay on the line to join our live toll-free event right now.
The Congressman can always be reached in his D.C. office at 202-225-2911.
Please hold while we connect you to your Access Live event. This Access Live event is currently in progress. Please note this call may be monitored, recorded, or rebroadcast. If you would like to ask a question during today's event, press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time.
Property to put one cannabis oil under their child's tongue, then take them back onto the property. Can you imagine doing this in the middle of January when it's 20 degrees below zero? And the parent has to leave probably their full-time job. So it's very difficult. Cannabis oil is not a hallucinatory drug, and it needs to be made legal. So thanks for the question, Amanda.
Interesting. Let's go to Larry Cox next. Larry, thanks for your participation here, and what is your question for the Congressman?
The question is, Congressman Blum, I wonder what's going to be done with curbing some of this fraudulent disability claims that are an ongoing thing here in our country. People that should be working, that it's an easy out, and it seems like they're healthier than I am, and they're just, once they get on it, they're on it for life. And I just think they should have never ever got on it, and Social Security should have never ever been interrupted from these people taking some of the Social Security away from the people that paid into it. That's the biggest concern, and there's a lot of people voice the same opinion, and I just don't hear enough of it. What's your opinion?
That's a great question, Larry. I agree with you 1,000%. It's sad that in a lot of these programs that are designed to help people truly have need, there's people who are being fraudulent, and then that hurts the folks that really need it because it depletes or it helps deplete the funds. Fraudulent disability claims. There's fraudulent. I just met with undercover agents from Orlando, Florida, about 5 or 6 weeks ago now, and they were talking about mobile grocery stores. I didn't know there were such things. And there was undercover film I saw where people would get in their car and they charge their SNAP credit card, say for $100, and then the undercover agent would give the person $50 in cash, and then the undercover agent, posing as a criminal, would get $50 in cash. Same thing with disability claims. There's abuse of the system. I think the majority of people who receive disability are disabled and need the system, but certainly we probably all know people and have seen people who are abusing that system. I, for one, have been an advocate. I'm on the oversight committee. That's Trey Gowdy's committee, and we investigate waste, fraud, and abuse. And we do a decent job of exposing these types of problems. One of the things that I tend to say, since I'm a career businessman, Larry, is, okay, we've exposed the problem, but now we need to make sure that the agency where the problem is follows through and does something about it. Because it's one thing to expose it and then just move the next day on to something else. And we all know the federal government is not exactly run like a good business. And so I'm consistently saying, asking Chairman Gowdy or Chairman Jim Jordan, Chairman Meadows, can we follow up? Can we follow up with the agencies and ask them what, in fact, they have done to try to police this or eliminate some of this? So as a business guy, as somebody with Eastern Iowa common sense, I mean, your question's dead on correct. We need to follow through and, to the extent possible, try to this fraud. We need to try to end it in the disability area, in the SNAP program. I'll show my age here, which I call food stamps. That program, and there's many other programs where there's fraud going on. There's fraud going on in the Medicare programs with people posing, or they're fraudulent physicians, and they're billing Medicare, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And at a recent hearing, Larry, they said, well, we can't really even look into a claim or these claims unless the fraud is over, I think it was like $10 million. And I just about fell off my chair, thinking, so if it's $9,500,000, we're really not going to look into that. So your point's well taken. I'm somebody, being a business guy, that's consistently advocating for us to follow through these things that we expose. We need to follow through, or more specifically, make the agency follow through, and then we need to check back with them. But great point, great question, Larry.
You're listening to the live telephone forum with our Congressman Blum, talking directly with you about your questions and your concerns about what's going on in Northeast Iowa and what's going on in Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country. Congressman is going to be here for the next 20 minutes or so. We're taking as many questions from you as we possibly can jam in. We want to get everybody out the door here before the big Singapore summit this evening, but it's still a great time to be together. We're also asking questions of you, and that's what I'm going to do right now. We have a poll question for you. We'd like you to respond by pressing a keypad number, the appropriate keypad number to reflect your answer on your phone. Here's the question. Which do you think would be the most effective way to stop school shootings? Press 1 if you think that you would support an armed guard and metal detectors that all students and visitors must pass through at every school. Press 1 if you believe that's the best answer. Press 2 if you believe it's training and arming teachers in the schools. Press 3 if you believe increasing gun control measures would be the most effective way to stop these tragic school shootings. So do that right now, and in the meantime, we're going to continue back with the phone calls, and we're going to go with Scott with a question about gerrymandering. Scott, welcome to the call. Thanks for participating. What's your question?
Hello, Congressman. Thanks for holding the town hall. I've been pleased to see your actions to reform gerrymandering so far, and perhaps you could summarize those quickly for our listeners. I'm curious what further things you might do to change gerrymandering practices. What with the census coming up in 2020, I think time is pressing. We would really like to get it fixed before, the next districts are drawn. And I'm curious what you think your colleagues in both your party and the Democratic Party, how they might respond to any efforts to reform gerrymandering, because depending on the state, it's a practice that has benefited both parties.
Yes, thanks for the question, Jerry. Gerrymandering, for the folks out there that aren't familiar with it, is, first of all, it's done by states. It is not done by the federal government. It's done every 10 years after the federal census is completed to see what the population is in each state. And gerrymandering reflects, it has to do with the drawing of the congressional House districts. And gerrymandering comes about, it's a negative thing, that the lines are drawn so that one political party or the other has an advantage. Iowa does it right. Iowa has a computer program that generates the lines, the district lines, and that computer program does not give any regard to political registrations of the district occupants, nor does it take into consideration if there's an incumbent or 2 or 3 incumbents that would live in the newly drawn district. Iowa does it right. We should be a model for the nation. What you're referring to is I signed on to an amicus brief, it's called, a friend of the court. I signed on to that. That went to the Supreme Court. And when they were hearing a case in Wisconsin, I believe it was, and I was arguing that that we need to do away with gerrymandering, that we need to draw the lines the way Iowa does, and not take into account political parties. So I hope the Supreme Court and state courts continue to rule against gerrymandering, and gerrymandering to me represents the swamp. And it's just that both parties do it, and whatever party's in power wants to stay in power, and if there's a Republican or a Democrat governor, they want their party to stay in power, and it happens, and we need to stop it. Some congressional districts in the country, Jerry, they look like, there's one congressional district that looks like a set of headphones, and if you can imagine what headphones look like, that's the way the congressional boundaries are. So it needs to end. It's the swamp. It's politics at its worst, and that's the kind of stuff like it's not good representative government. So let's try to end it, but it has to be done through the court system because neither political party is going to willingly do it on their own. However, Iowa, absolute model on how to do it right.
It really is, and anyone who follows politics knows that. Iowa is the model, and many other states are going that way to try to follow the model of Iowa, Congressman. So, very good. Our next caller, Cindy, has a question about the Cedar Rapids flood wall. Welcome to the call, Cindy. Thanks for taking some time to ask your question. You can go ahead.
Congressman Blum, I'd like to know what you plan to do about the flood wall here in Cedar Rapids. It's been 10 years since the flood of 2008, and I believe when you were campaigning the last time through, you were promising some action on the flood wall. I know the money has been appropriated, but so far Cedar Rapids has not seen any of that $78 million. And do you have a solution to this problem?
Yes. I don't. When you say it, when I campaign, I promised action. I certainly I can't promise that the federal government's going to do anything, particularly when it comes to projects like this. It's been the monies that were appropriated in 2014, I believe, and they were appropriated in 2016 for the flood wall by both the House and the Senate. And we just our appropriation amendment just made it the House version of the water bill. Was ruled in order last week, in fact. So this, I assume it's going to make it through the Senate. This will be the third Congress in a row that has appropriated or approved the monies. Now, I learned very quickly when I got here there's a difference between appropriating money and actually, I should say it was authorized. The money was authorized probably in the last three Congresses, but there's a difference between authorizing money and appropriating money. Appropriating means spending the money. So, it's been authorized in the Senate and the House that both said the Cedar Rapids flood wall project is important. However, for whatever reasons, I could get into the reasons. Cedar Rapids doesn't meet the formulas that have been set up by the Office of Management and Budget. The last two Congresses, that was Obama's Office of Management and Budget. It does meet the Army Corps of Engineers requirements, so that's good. Senator Ernst, Senator Grassley, and myself have been working tirelessly over the last, I've been here 3.5 years now, so I'll say over the last 3.5 years we've been working tirelessly with the powers to be to try to make the Cedar Rapids flood wall a reality. Whenever I see the president, I bring it up. Whenever I see Mick Mulvaney, the director of OMB, I bring it up. And I know Senators Grassley and Ernst are doing the same thing as well. So with President Trump now in the White House, who's a businessman, who's a builder, who understands infrastructure projects very well, I'm hopeful. And hopefully we can get something done here on the flood wall. But it's the federal government, and it moves slowly. And as the caller said, it's been 10 years since the initial flood back in 2008. But we work hard, and it helps to have the two United States senators from Iowa and myself together, always going in a unified front to the Army Corps of Engineers, to the Office of Management and Budget, and to the White House to push for the Cedar Rapids flood wall project. The president loves Cedar Rapids. We talk about it almost every time we're together, and I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic, but one never knows until we see the actual money, until we see the approval. So we continue to push hard all the time.
You're listening to a live telephone forum with Congressman Blum, talking about issues here in Iowa and also in Washington, D.C. and around the country. We have poll questions for you. In between the questions from you, here's the next one. Is the economy doing better today in Iowa than it was 2 years ago because of the Tax Cuts and the Jobs Act, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? Press 1 if you believe, yes, this is true, the economy is doing better than 2 years ago. Press 2 if you believe, no, it's not. Press 3 if you're not sure. You can go ahead and do that on your telephone keypad right now, and we'll go straight back to the phones while you answer and speak with Matthew, also in Cedar Rapids. Matthew, thanks for participating in the call, Congressman Blum. Go ahead.
Hello, Matthew. Hello.
I wonder if he's on mute.
Is that you, Matthew?
Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies. I was on mute.
I know the feeling.
Holding the event.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. Thank you for the tax cut, but my bigger concern is the budget and the debt, and concerns with the interest rate that the Federal Reserve controls and the cutting of the size of government. Because each time the Fed raises rates, we're going to be paying more of a percentage of our budget to the interest alone on the debt and not even paying principal. How do we tackle that?
I think I heard most of the question. I kind of, in bits and pieces, heard it. We're in a rising interest rate environment, Matthew. That's correct. That's a good thing. That means business. That means our economy is doing well. Interest rates have been at record lows over the last 5 or 10 years because of the weakness of our economy. So interest rates, we need them to normalize. 4 to 5% for a prime rate would be back to the normal rate. When interest rates were 0.5% or at 0.75%, that's really like a tax on our elderly who have spent, a lot of them have spent their lifetime building a nest egg up, and then when the interest rates are so darn low, they're receiving next to no income from their savings accounts. So 4 or 5% for their passbook savings or CDs for our elderly retired citizens would be a great thing. That's the good news. Now, the downside of that, as you mentioned, I believe you mentioned it, was we have $21 trillion in debt, and our blended interest rate on our debt is just about 2% federally. So if interest rates double, let's say we're paying 4%, that means we're going to be spending over $500 billion a year on interest by our federal government, and I don't know where we're going to get that money. Right today, we're spending about $260 billion on interest. The tax cuts are not going to cost the federal government a dime. The tax cuts are going to pay for themselves. I stood on the House floor with 2 posters, one showing the Reagan tax cuts of 1986 and one showing the Kennedy tax cuts of 1964. And yes, they were passed a year after he was assassinated. And both times, the revenues to the federal government doubled. And in fact, I believe it was in the Kennedy tax cuts, the revenues over doubled. So the revenues are going to continue to grow. They're going to grow at a faster pace because we have more taxpayers. We have more people making more money. That's all good stuff. The problem we have is spending. President Reagan said it back in the 80s. He said we don't have these large deficits because we tax too little. We have these large deficits because we spend too much. So I'll end with this on this question. We are bringing in today an all-time record of tax revenues to the federal government. Never have we taken more out of the pockets of Americans than we are today. But yet, we're going to have large deficits this year, next year, and in the foreseeable future because as much as we're bringing in, we spend even more. So we need to, I support a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. In fact, I voted for it when it came through the House here a few months ago. We need to get spending under control, or we are going to be in a bad place as a country. And it's like I said, it's record tax revenues, but we're even a bigger record in our spending of those tax revenues.
Well, we have a poll question for the listeners on that very subject, Congressman, and so please respond on your keypad again. Do you think there should be an amendment added to the U.S. Constitution requiring Congress to balance the federal budget? Press 1 on your keypad if you believe, yes, there should be a constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget. Press 2 on your phone if you believe the answer to that should be no. And while you answer, we will continue taking phone calls. Virgil from Bellevue is up next. Virgil, welcome to the call with Congressman Blum. What's your question?
Well, I am very happy with the tax cut, and thank you for your help. I am under the impression, though, that the individual tax cuts are not permanent, and that at some date in the near future, we will again pop back up to the old tax rates and be in for a surprise. Is that true? And are we going to be facing higher tax rates again in the future?
Yeah, Virgil, a great question. Right now, the bottom line is we could, because of a budget reconciliation, that's the vehicle that this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act kind of rode on. So it only took 51 votes in the United States Senate. Because we're using budget reconciliation, we could only have tax cuts of $1.5 trillion over 10 years. But we actually cut taxes more than that. So the way we did that was, or the way that the Ways and Means Committee did it was, in year 10, so 9 years from now, I guess would be, 2027, the individual tax rates go back to where they were 9 years from now. Now, once this bill was being negotiated in the House and the Senate, I was a big advocate, and I sold my rear end off to try to get these individual tax rates made permanent. And I said, if anything, let's make the corporate tax rates revert back in year 10. So let's make these individual tax rates permanent. I didn't win that argument. So in year 10, they're scheduled to go back to the old rates, and that's how there's very misleading advertising out there saying, Congressman Blum raised your tax rates. Well, they're using year 10, and what we plan on doing in the House, and I hope the Senate follows along with us, is passing separate legislation, Virgil, either this year or next year, separate legislation to make the individual tax cuts permanent. And for some reason, if we can't get that passed, I can't imagine a Congress 9 years from now saying, let's raise taxes on individuals. I just can't imagine it. It'd be horrible for the economy. So worst case, I don't see it happening. But between now and then, I got to believe that we're going to make the individual tax rates permanent. But I was an advocate for making the individual tax rates permanent and making the corporate tax rates be the temporary ones. But I lost that argument. But I still think we're going to get it done. But it's a great question. And we can probably go for another, maybe 6 or 7 minutes, Fritz. Take a couple more questions, and then we'll get to the summit.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's try to squeeze it all in here. We have one more poll question I'd like to ask, and to do that, we'll just get to that in a minute. But we want to hear first from Mark, who was asking about welfare requirements. Mark, welcome to the event tonight. You're on with Congressman Blum.
Thank you. Yeah, my question has to deal with work requirements for welfare. What your opinion is for that, what you're looking at planning on doing. I've been reading that the unemployment rate is extremely low, 3.8%, and that there's actually more jobs out there than people looking for them. To me, the welfare is a pool of resources out there that is not being utilized.
Yes, great question, Mark. According to a report that I'm looking at right now on my desk, in the state of Iowa, there are 102,000 people that are they're able-bodied adults. They're between the ages of 18 and 62. They do not have a child under the age of 6 in the house, and they're physically and mentally able to work. 102,000 who are not working. So I assume if I have a fourth of the state I represent, there's probably 25,000 people that fit that bill in my district. Manufacturers, almost all businesses in my district, Mark, need employees. And we won't achieve the economic growth rates that we could if we can't find employees. And we need more employees in Iowa. One of the places is let's get people off of dependency on the government, and let's move them to independency by getting them into the labor force. Right now the House has work requirements in the Farm Bill. 85% of the Farm Bill is nothing to do with the farm. It's to do with food stamps. And we have work requirements in it that say if you're between 18 and 62 years old and you're physically and mentally able to work and you do not have a child under the age of 6 in your house, you ought to be working. When I talk to Iowans about this concept, everybody nods their head. They say this is just common sense. And as you said, I believe you said, there's more jobs out there than there are people looking for them. So, no one can say, I can't find a job. They're out there, and our employers are begging people to apply. And I've always said if you're between 18 and 65 and physically and mentally able to work, you ought to be working. and I don't say this with malice in my heart toward people who are on welfare or food stamps. It's quite the opposite. I love those people, and I want what's best for those folks. And I think an honest job, an honest day's work is absolutely the best thing for anybody that's currently dependent on the government. So I'm an advocate for it, pushing for it, and we've got work requirements in the Farm Bill for food stamps. So I'm hopeful that's going to pass the House here in about 10 days.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Congressman. We're getting close to the end, but I want to encourage you, if you have pressed *3 to ask a question here this evening, and we haven't gotten to you, hang on the line, because we're going to be able to give you a chance at the end to leave a voicemail with your question, and the office will get back to you with a response later on. So even if you can't get onto the program tonight, stay on there and ask your question, and we'll get you the answer that you're looking for. It's just one more way we can communicate with you. We're going to take one more call live, but first, one more response.
Let's take a couple more. We can take a couple more, Fritz, I think, can't we?
Can we? Okay. Okay. Well, that's great.
I'll try to be brief in my answers. I'm probably the problem.
You've done really well tonight. We've gone through quite a few. Okay, that's great. Then here's the last poll question of the night. It has to do with term limits. Do you think that term limits should be implemented for members of Congress? Yes, press 1. No, press 2 on your keypad. 3 if you're not sure. And so on that same subject, we want to bring Jerry onto the line. He has a question about term limits for you, Congressman. Jerry, welcome to the call.
Thank you. Congressman, thank you for your public service, and thank you for having this town hall meeting tonight. I have a simple question. Where do you stand on term limits, and how apropos your poll just asked that question?
Oh, I know. I was just, was it, Fritz, was it hit 1 if you're for term limits?
Yeah, that was true.
If I could hit 1,000 times, Jerry, I would. I ran 4 years ago on term limits, being an advocate for them. Since being here in the swamp, my God, do we need term limits? It's not going to solve all the problems, but I see every single day politicians here, congressional members, senators, acting in ways that can only be explained, making votes that can only be explained because they are so concerned about their next election. And I would rather see statesmen here who care about the future of our country, Jerry, than see people here that are only worried about their next election. I support a term limits bill to amendment to the Constitution, and I keep pushing it, and we keep asking the Speaker if we can have a vote. But, sadly, I think most senators and House members, Jerry, when they're back in their states, say they're for term limits, but when they get here, they're not for term limits. I started a term limits caucus here in the House, Jerry, and we have 435 House members, correct? And we only have 30 that join the term limits caucus. Let me run that by you again. We have 30 House members in the term limits caucus out of 435 members, and that is very disappointing. But with President Trump in the White House, I am hopeful that we can at least get a vote, make the representatives and senators go on record as being for or against term limits. I'm convinced it would help make this place less swampy.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, our final call of the evening going live will be Zack. Zack, welcome to the program. What's your question for Congressman Blum?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Congressman Blum, earlier today you talked about being on the Oversight and Reform Committee, and I was just wondering what your opinion is on Scott Pruitt as administrator of the EPA and his abuse as administrator with getting his wife purchasing a Chick-fil-A franchise, him renting the $50 a night condo from the lobbyist's wife, purchasing the $43,000 soundproof phone booth, and all of his first-class travel, just to name a few.
Yep, great question, Zach. I think that the Oversight Committee should hold a hearing about Secretary Pruitt and some of those things that you just mentioned and more, because I think a lot of Americans would be very interested in what the answers Midwestern farmer and ethanol. And I know Senator Ernst, Senator Grassley, and myself, once again, whenever we're at the White House or talking to the administration, we're consistently defending ethanol in our productive farmers in our state, and reminding those folks that we don't think Secretary Pruitt is serving the president well, because the president had said when he was running for office that he supports ethanol, and we remind him that we were very important in his election to the presidency. So I've got issues with Pruitt on both levels, but I know Trey Gowdy is looking into this, and I, for one, would absolutely vote. Not that we get to vote to have hearings, but I would vote to have a hearing on some of these things with Pruitt. Thanks for the question, Zach.
And Congressman, last thoughts. Here we're coming up in about 5 minutes. The big summit in Singapore is going to occur. Any last thoughts or any other subject before we wrap it up for the evening?
Well, typically North Korea, has not exactly been forthcoming with in these types of things. I'm hopeful with President Trump, though. He's a business guy. He's a negotiator. He's preparing to walk away. And we all know North Korea as a country is, most of them live in abject poverty. And if he wants to bring his country into this century and into the modern world and have some prosperity for his citizens, I think the president will say America will help, and we'll help you get obtain prosperity for your country and its citizens if you denuclearize. So I'm hopeful, but I don't think it's going to happen in one meeting. As you and I were talking, Fritz, I hope they would at least declare an end to the Korean War. I think that'd be a great start, and let's go from there. But I'm very hopeful, and as I say, it's President Trump. Who knows? He might get a heck of a lot accomplished in a 2-hour meeting here.
Yeah, you just never know. Well, thanks very much, Congressman. Thanks for taking the time to speak with all of us. And thanks to each of you for your participation tonight. And you can just hang on the line and listening to the programming.
Very much.
We look forward to the next time. We'll do it sometime soon.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.